Thank you.
What's the expansion timeline looking like?
Coming in hot here.
We forgot to tell.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. Yeah, no specific news to share. Obviously, there's been a lot of rumors circulating, but we will have an announcement next week. So, more to come in the not too distant future.
Maybe just ask about this event itself. Obviously, a new kind of way of keeping the league front of mind without the draft as sort of the cornerstone of the winter months. What was the ideation that came into putting this together?
Yeah, appreciate that. I think first and foremost, knowing that we want to be always on, it's an opportunity to start the drumbeat of coverage and interest in the league going into our next season. Second, and specific to the idea of like what this event is, we know that the growth of this league is conditioned on our players being stars, and part of them being stars is making them feel like the superstars that they are. And so just bringing them all together before we're in the heat of competition, making them feel like the league is here to support them, collecting content that we're going to be able to roll out for the rest of the year and do it in a strategic way. It's really the first time we've done anything like this, but it is not uncommon in other professional sports leagues. So it's the first of what I think will be an evolution of how we think about storytelling. And you probably heard me talk about it, championship. Like storytelling and player star making is really the cornerstone of what 2025 is going to be about. And this is the beginning of that.
And is that a conversation with the Players Association of just talking about getting players involved and getting that buy-in to do something like this?
It's a conversation with the Players Association. It's a conversation directly with players and their agents. It's a conversation with all of our media partners and sponsors. We know that our players are incredible and their stories are incredible, and when, not if, but when the world knows their stories, people are going to be drawn to this league and want to watch and buy tickets, and that's going to really feed the flywheel of growth that's going to allow for us to achieve the exponential increases year over year that we know are possible. And I think it's not unrelated to the new collective bargaining agreement where we have revenue sharing in place. So knowing that we have incentive alignment around growth and that the players can enjoy the outcomes from a financial perspective of that growth is going to allow for us to really work together constructively to grow this league more quickly than we otherwise would have.
Jessica, there's the kind of the semi-annual infrastructure question coming off of seeing the Angel City players reacting to the training facility yesterday, I think. Are there other teams that are making progress on that front where they're getting closer to that same sort of unveiling video where their players get to sort of celebrate that moment too?
The short answer is yes, both from a training facility and from a stadium perspective. And I would argue in the last 2.5 years, we've made more progress than anyone thought could be possible. And our work is not done. Just to cite a recent example, the Player Association players and I recently testified in Chicago to talk to the state legislature about the importance in investing in infrastructure for women, and what that does to their daily training environment and the way they'll be able to show up to unify and inspire the community. And so, yeah, this is definitely not the last, and I suspect we'll have more announcements on that front in the 2025 season.
On the stadium piece, with so much of the revenue coming at the local team level as opposed to national, how are you feeling about how important those stadiums are, and how big a priority is that for the league office, getting those team operated, soccer specific stadiums across the entire league?
Yeah, I think I've said it before. It's probably one of the more challenging and important initiatives for us at the league to put our clubs in a position to be able to, number one, control their own destiny in terms of making a strategic schedule that satisfies our local and national growth objectives, and then secondly, being able to control the revenue streams that you wouldn't otherwise be able to control when you're a tenant. And It's the reason that so many of our expansion decisions have really centered around that as a core tenet. As we think about the way we're going to be able to get ourselves from where we were to where we know we need to be, expansion is really the quickest way for us to set the standard that we want to be the new standard for the league, and we'll use that as an opportunity to drive the facility discussions that need to happen in our incumbent markets.
Is there any concern about facility runway going into 2026 with sort of Boston figuring out their stadium situation still? Well, they haven't figured out, but the construction of White Stadium, and then also just with the other team not announced yet?
There's no doubt it's a relatively short timeline. I do sort of have folks in the women's soccer community point out that just 3 years ago, before I joined, teams had 120 days from start to launch. Obviously, we've evolved beyond that, and we're going to deploy the resources we need at the league office to be able to support those teams and make sure that they're set up for success in their launch, and that we all sort of lock arms as we navigate what will inevitably be challenging decisions that need to be made to make sure that those teams are set up for success for 2026.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of getting the new CBA done and how important it is to keep the league where it's at right now?
Yeah, I mean, just for context, we approached the union officially and formally in the summer of 2023 to voluntarily reopen the CBA, knowing that the agreement would have otherwise expired in 2026. So that's like a pretty strategic decision on our part to invite the Player Association to the table to see if there would be a way for us to strike a deal that would both give us the long-term labor piece that we think is going to be necessary for our upcoming sponsorship and media commercial objectives, and also evolve with the game that is obviously changing so quickly on a global scale. And so we were able to achieve that objective, and most importantly, to get our deal done quietly without external pressure, which was a key priority for us, because we know, and obviously I'm a labor lawyer, so this is something I think about a lot, the foundation of the relationship with the Player Association in this country in particular is fundamental to any growth strategy, particularly a growth strategy like we have, which really requires us to be working in partnership to grow this league.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of like why Denver and why Denver is right for right now? I think a lot of fans are curious about the specific criteria behind why the league chooses certain cities and in those specific years in particular. So why Denver?
Well, without confirming the city, because we do have an announcement next week, I can talk a little bit about the criteria that we use from an expansion perspective, which really focuses on 3 priorities. And I would say in order of importance from our perspective, given where we are in our expansion across our very large geographic footprint in the U.S. The first is ownership, and knowing that we have the right owner with the right both financial wherewithal as well as vision to invest. The second being infrastructure, making sure that we have a bid with a professional and appropriate stadium and training facility that meets the standards not just of today, but of where we think the league is heading. So future-proofing where we think we're going to be. And then the third being the market. The reason the market is third is really only because we're in this vast country where we know there's opportunity for growth in so many different cities. So it doesn't have to be the driver for our decisions. Whereas, when I was at the NHL and other leagues, when you're a 30-team league, there's probably only a handful of cities that you would consider because the market needs to be large enough to be able to support a major league team. I could sit here and think of 10 to 12 team markets where we could have a team be successful. And so, we're excited for for our announcement next week.
Along those same lines, what are the plans for expansion going forward after that announcement?
Yeah, well, I get to riff off of what I was just saying. We know that our expansion is not done. We're in active conversations with our board to determine the next sequence of expansion. And as I've shared before, we have so many interested bidders who were not given a team in this round. And part of the effort in the next 3 to 6 months is really developing our next expansion strategy to make sure that we both capitalize on the incredible demand for an expansion team, as well as balance some of the other up-leveling of our system that needs to happen in order for us to achieve our objectives. So we want to be aggressive with expansion, but we also want to be strategic and smart about how we do that and make sure that we make those decisions through the lens of our vision to be the best league in the world. So other things that relate to that are the pipeline for talent, the pipeline for technical staff, our media deal, looking at our commercial growth strategy, and making sure we're building this league in a way that's long-term sustainable.
Commissioner, with recent rollbacks in government, things of that nature, what are the additional plans for the league to protect marginalized groups, trans people, people of color, international players, etc.? What's in place? What's been the reaction from the league and in the association, with the Players Association?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I can say from the NWSL perspective is the work we've done over the last almost 3 years is to really define and lean into who we are and our values. And so from our perspective, nothing will change about how we show up to support our entire ecosystem, players, staff, and fans. We stand for excellence, we stand for unity, we stand for joy, and we'll continue to ensure that we're a place where no matter what stakeholder group you represent, you have a place to celebrate and be welcomed into our world.
We're in Southern California right now. It feels remiss not to mention, the wildfires. Is everybody, in terms of the NWSL, the teams, any league staff, or everybody who could have been in danger, are they okay? And what went into the decision to actually keep the media day here?
Yeah, appreciate that question. I guess to talk about the first, which is probably most important, certainly, even just being here the last couple of days, and this is true for our ecosystem, I don't think you can walk around the city of Los Angeles and not meet someone who's either directly affected or 1 degree of separation. So actually being here is an opportunity to really sort of go behind the curtain. It's hard to sort of feel it when you're across the country, but you really do sort of understand and appreciate how traumatic and drastic this was in terms of the impact, both short, medium, and long term, on this community. We had daily meetings about the question of whether we should either postpone or relocate this event, which had been planned, of course, long before the fires. We very thoughtfully made the decision based on where we understood the community to be, and this was literally probably less than a week ago, that we were going to proceed with the event really through the lens of believing and understanding from people in the community and the public sector that part of the recovery effort of this city is going to be driving tourism and bringing people back to some semblance of normalcy. And in the meetings we've had over the last 2 days that are adjacent to this particular event, that has been validated. I was in a meeting yesterday, by way of example, with people at Amazon, and people in the meeting had lost their homes, and of course the initial reaction is like, you don't need to be here, and they're like, no, I need to be here. Like I need to re-engage in my life and start the healing process. And so we hope that is part of what we can bring to the community, and also more directly when the fires began and as we were evaluating whether we were going to come here, a component of these 2 days has a community service element. And so for players who are descending on Los Angeles and feeling like, if I'm going to show up here, I need to do something that acknowledges and supports some of the needs of the community, we have built that into our program so that for our players, for our staff, who of course feel awful about what happened here, that they can play a role directly in the recovery effort.
You called out the media deal as, you know, a potential source for growth. I know you got a couple years still to go before that comes up for renewal, but coming off the success last season, have you started putting together any forecasts for what that step up is going to look like?
Yes, we are deep in conversations both internally and with our partners, candidly, about what the future holds. First and foremost, it's our job and one of our most important priorities to make sure that the investment that our 4 partners have made in us proves to have a return for them. That is going to be the single most important driver for the growth that we believe we should be able to achieve in our next cycle. And so actually in the off season, we've done annual business meetings. I mentioned Amazon yesterday, who we were with each of our 4 partners to do a year in review, to plan for 2025, to understand how we can show up as good partners and vice versa. And so, yeah, we're really proud of the first year we've had together, and all 4 of our partners are locking arms to lean into next year for 2025, and we think there is every reason to believe that the growth that we saw this past year will continue year over year, and that'll all feed into renewal discussions and interest from the marketplace, because, you know, right now there's just a tremendous amount of demand for women's sports content and not all that much content, and obviously that puts us in an enviable position, but also creates a responsibility to invest to make sure that we maximize that.
Do you have a number in mind yet on what a successful deal is going to look like double, triple, have you?
You know, I think the short answer is no. I think women's sports uniquely, and this has been our expansion strategy, this has been our sponsorship strategy, this has been our media strategy. I think with the exponential growth that is expected and has occurred in women's sports, there actually is no way to predict. You have to let the market determine and use competitive tension to drive the value. And so, you know, our approach will be similar in this space, and, you know, the market will tell us what our rights are worth.
This is the first season without a draft and unrestricted free agency, and I kind of wanted to get your wide-angle view on how that's going. One GM called it kind of the wild, wild west, so I wanted to get your thoughts on how do you think it's going?
Yeah, well, I think it's a learning process for the whole ecosystem. I think for sure on the technical staff side, as you mentioned, they've never experienced anything like this, and there actually is nothing to point to as a case study of how to make this transition, because there is no league that has gone from a world of a draft and having years of service to be able to earn free agency and just having that melt away overnight. But I think it's also been an adjustment for the players. I've seen some reports of the number of players who are out of contract who are still looking for a job, and I think being able to find places for all of them, either within our ecosystem or beyond, is also going to be an adjustment for everyone. And so I think time will tell the resources that our clubs need to be able to make their scouting processes more sophisticated. It's created a really important dialogue at our board level about investing in the path to pro, which I think is going to be the next chapter of this league's growth. It sort of goes hand in hand with the idea of not having a draft and having full free agency, that you need to shore up the foundation of your strategy to bring talent into the league. and we have ideas and plans about how we're going to phase that in to the growth of the league. And this country has a tremendous amount of talent, more talent than any other country in the world, and we think there's a huge opportunity to use this as a catalyst for investment in youth.
So would you say that you're looking at a kind of a more robust academy system?
Unclear how it's going to manifest, and the word academy means different things to different people. So without putting labels on it, the way that I would put it is that I think there'll be a more robust strategy, both on the macro level at the league and with our clubs, about what we describe as the pathway to pro. I have no doubt that year over year, the way things look today will be different from a systemic perspective, the way they look a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now.
And the CBA seems like a huge step forward. You've mentioned, keeping the league competitive with Europe. Talk about exponential growth. There's been reporting that, the women's soccer stratosphere might be seeing its first $1 million transfer sometime soon. How does the NWSL, with the cap considerations, with the idea of spending versus bringing money in, stay competitive when it looks like spending is going to start growing exponentially as well? And then maybe as a follow-up to that, what mechanisms are you giving your expansion teams to be able to compete not only within the league without a draft, without those parity rules, but also on the global standard?
Yeah, well, specifically, before I get to those questions, I think it's incumbent on all of us to just recognize and acknowledge how incredible it is that there are reports like that, and that the global ecosystem has now evolved to the point where that is a reality. I don't think 3 years ago people could have imagined that there'd be rumors of $1 million transfer value, and all of that just reinforces the strategic decisions our owners have made to invest in this league the way they have. I think what we are attempting to do, that we will continue to monitor each and every year, is balance the need to invest in top talent and do everything we can to attract and retain the best players in the world, which is core to our strategy, and make sure that our league maintains the competitiveness that has given us a superpower on the world stage. And we're going to continue to ensure that we balance those two pieces, and make sure that we're evaluating in the macro how we're doing. We're not necessarily going to get distracted by one-off decisions that may have something go our way or something not go our way. Of course, we want every player who's incredible to stay in our league. We also recognize that, unlike any other sport, this is a global game, and it is part of the game that players will evaluate all of their options, and all of that is a good thing, a sign of health for the women's soccer space.
And then just for the expansion teams, what do you tell a team that's coming in that doesn't have those mechanisms, like an expansion draft or a college draft? Yeah,
we've given a lot of thought, and we'll have more to share in the coming weeks about the policy that we will implement to ensure that the expansion teams have the ability to be successful. We know that in order to continue to drive the values in the expansion space and to make those expansion teams successful, they need to be able to be in a position to build their roster, and sort of catch up with the rest of the league. And we're confident that we will be implementing those mechanisms, and certainly our expansion teams in Boston and Denver are in lockstep with us on those strategies.
The schedule just came out. You kind of got that off your plate. Is that, first of all, is that getting easier for the league to get through it? It is moving up a little bit, so is it getting a little easier to work through it?
I wouldn't describe it as easier. I would say we're getting better at it. The challenges actually in many ways get harder every year, because the demands on the commercial side of our business are more intense. And so, when I came here 3 years ago, there were not commercial considerations that we needed to take into account. We didn't have media partners that were paying us a lot of money who had expectations to drive viewership goals. Our owners are now investing, and so they need to I think your question earlier, they need to sell tickets. There's a lot more sophisticated and competing priorities that pressure us to balance a lot of different objectives. What I think is different now is that we actually have the resources internally to plan for that, and to be able to have a really strategic approach to how we prioritize all those interests. And no schedule will ever be perfect. There will always be, and hopefully it's true that everyone has some complaints about the schedule. That probably means we've done our jobs right. I do think that this year's schedule is the best schedule we've ever put out from a competitive perspective on the sporting side and from a commercial perspective. And we also were able to continue to bring in some of the things that we think are really important. I know a lot of media are excited about it. We're excited about Decision Day. We're excited about the introduction of like a rivalry weekend. We're excited about the games that we're featuring in national broadcast, and we think those three things together are going to drive incremental interest in the league.
On a related note, is the timeline for this year's championship venue, is that being sped up, or is that sort of something that will come out roughly at the same time as it did last year?
You can remind me, was that around June that we announced it last year?
year?
Okay. I think, yeah, summer. No, I it's without making a commitment. It is definitely our goal to be sooner than that. Like we have continued to do better on getting ahead of planning cycles with the schedule and other things. It would be our hope that it'll be in the next few months that we'll be able to announce championship for 2025.
And then, Commissioner, again, just talking about the commercial side, what are the conversations about other tournaments? Obviously, the Liga Mekki and Summer Cup, is it going to really exist this year, or if it is in a different capacity? So what's the conversation around that in terms of having more competitions, but also keeping in mind player health, player safety, and then two, what are the ideas around maybe exhibitions? I know there's been a lot of talk around maybe an all-star game or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that is a huge opportunity in the future. Obviously, part of what we love about this league, and at least for me personally, coming from more sort of established traditional sports leagues, is that we can innovate and test and learn. And we think there were a lot of benefits to what we did with Liga MX Femenil, and excited to continue to build on that in the future in whatever iteration that manifests. We're going to sort of deploy from a strategic perspective some thought around what we can do in the future. I think the calendar becomes such a challenge. And I think on a global scale, I just actually spent 3 days in Madrid last week. I'm the co-chair of the Women's League Forum, where we actually had 14 leagues from across the world meet in Madrid for 3 days. And I think there's universal recognition that for the top players in the world, and this is true across all leagues, they're probably playing too much. And for the non-top players in the world, they're not playing enough. So there's this growing separation that we see in our league, but it's actually much more systemic than that, and it relates to not only the things that we can control, but also the things that are outside of our control. And so I think it's incumbent upon us at this time, as we're sort of taking a step back and assessing the things that we've done in the past, deciding what we want to do in the future, to not only look at it through the lens of our league, but also what's happening at CONCACAF, what's happening at FIFA, and make sure that we look at the holistic experience from the player's perspective and also from the commercial perspective, so that we're collectively growing the pie. Obviously, this is something that has been a challenge on the men's side to figure out how you coordinate that. I think I can put on my Women's League Forum hat for a moment and say that we believe, we meaning the 18 leagues that are part of this group and the 14 leagues that were present in that meeting, that we can do it differently on the women's side because of the high growth potential, because of where we are in our growth cycle, and all being really challenger emerging properties in our mindset of how we think about the things that we're going to be doing in the future. And so long-winded answer to say, like, I think there's a lot more to come on this, but in order to do things like that right, in terms of exhibition games, international tournaments, all those things, we're going to have to reach outside of our direct ecosystem to plan more strategically, which is going to be challenging but really important to its success.
And just a quick follow-up. Is there any strategy in place currently, or will there be shortly to kind of piggyback off of the Men's World Cup, being states higher than any specific initiatives the league is going to do?
Yeah, for sure. We, well, I think as a initial step, you know, we've taken the opportunity to try to lean in to be a convener. We invited the Men's World Cup host committees to our championship and facilitated a meeting with them, more as a sort of independent stakeholder, but also recognizing that a lot of those cities want to invest in legacy projects that benefit women and girls in their communities, and we have overlaps in many of those cities. And so doing what we can to be supportive and additive to the process for them, and ensure that we're using those opportunities, investments strategically to benefit the growth of the women's game in this country. So we're resourcing it internally and ensuring that we're intentional about how we connect those dots in those communities.
In line with the sort of planning and vision and expansion, 2022, 24, and now next year in 2026 has all been double expansions. In the future, is that still always going to be the planning goal for NWSL? Is the goal to always sort of introduce 2 teams in expansion?
Not necessarily, is I think the answer. Certainly it helps solve for the ease of making the calendar when you have a balanced schedule to keep the number of teams even. And, you know, again, from the theme of being a challenger emerging property, if there's compelling reasons to have an odd number of teams, and that is in the best interest of the league for any number of reasons, that we would consider that. And so we have the ability, I think, uniquely in the professional sports landscape to be nimble and flexible, to make sure that we're responsive to the things that we need to do to capitalize on the interest in the league. And so certainly it's our plan, and it would be our default, but that wouldn't stop us from evaluating it based on the circumstances that are specific in a particular year.
There were a lot of markets that were eager to get into the league, so with part of the contingency plans, maybe we would sort of kind of make sure that these markets are on retainer since they're so eager to join the league. I can't imagine coming off of a year where this league had to navigate, 3 different kind of club ownership sales, that in the future there might be other clubs that are interested in perhaps pursuing an ownership sale. Is it also about kind of keeping that wide Rolodex of markets and ownership groups who are interested in engaging, and just sort of saying, hold on, we might have room for you?
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of my time in the investor relations sector, cultivating those relationships, ensuring that we keep the lines of communication open, making sure they're being brought along on the journey of our growth, so that when there are opportunities, we have the ability to sort of plug them in to those spaces where their interest might make sense. So, you know, I think we've said this even in the last round of expansion. I can't think of a circumstance where we've said a definitive no. It is more like a not now, and that the door is always open to continue those conversations.
Have you seen a willingness on the ownership bid side to stay in communication with the league after being told not this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually probably one of the things I'm most proud of, because that's a hard thing to do. We I think over-index on leaning into those situations to make sure that anytime we're not telling someone the answer they want to hear, which is like, yes, you're in, that they understand why, and that we work to see if there's an opportunity to pivot and work together in the future.
You mentioned the Women's League Forum, just to rewind for a moment, which is a wonderful thing. And you mentioned kind of trying to go in a different direction than men's football in some capacity. And over the many years, a lot of people who have been tried and true fans of men's football have been priced out. We started to see that in the WNBA in the past 2 years as well. Is that something that the league talks about? Is there a plan in place where, as more money comes in and as there is more potential for revenue in these stadiums, to keep prices at a place where the fans who have been around since the inception of the league can still afford to go to those games and be fans?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen it. I hope. We talk a lot internally at the league about the need to do two things at the same time. We need to expand the core. We need to go beyond the women's soccer community to grow our fan base. And we also need to know and recognize that the special sauce of this league is our core fan base, and that we need to attend to them, make sure that we're including them on the journey and staying true to who we are. Those two things, of course, have some friction at times, and we're really trying to be intentional. And I think the special thing about the women's soccer community, that concept of like bringing your core along and expanding is not unique. That exists in every sports league. I think the thing that is unique about women's soccer, in my experience from other sports, is that the women's soccer core fan really wants us to grow. In other situations that I've had in my experience in professional sports, there's a little bit of like, well, we've been here and where have you been? That is not part of the values of this community. This community is inclusive and welcoming and saying like, yes, we've been here and welcome to the party. It's been fun without you, but there's room for you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of why when people from outside our core sample the NWSL, either in stadium or on TV as a viewer or on social media, they want to come back because it is a place where people feel welcome. And I think that is the thing that is special about the core of our fans and the core values that we continue to try to perpetuate.
Jumping back really quickly to expansion, how many parties would you say were interested in this round?
Oh, I think I might have shared this previously. I think we started at 80. That was 9 months ago or more. And we sort of ran this process not that different from the last process, where there were stages and phases where that curated based on either what we were looking for or what they were looking for. And so, yeah, I mean, again, the demand certainly exceeds the supply, which is part of what's helped us to drive the value of the league.
8-0.
Yeah, I think 80.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean 80 different groups.
Right.
Obviously not 80 different markets, but 80 different groups, and those groups could take many different forms. Sometimes it is like a community group who is looking for a control owner. Sometimes it's a control owner who's saying like, I want to be active. Like it is very specific to the situation. And again, part of the fun of this is really matchmaking, which we've done effectively, which is to say like, you bring something unique to the table. You aren't the bid. We're going to sort of put you on pause and figure out how we match you with something that could make it what it needs to be. And sometimes that matchmaking can happen in the same round, and sometimes it is we're going to put you on the side for a minute, help you understand why you're not quite there, and keep you in mind as we think about future growth.
Speaking of ownership standards, obviously the CBA, there were a lot of new minimum standards put in for player experience, player safety. How is the league kind of implementing, making sure all of the clubs are kind of up to code on that by the beginning of the season? And have you seen any clubs struggle with it? What has that process been like?
Yeah, I mean, we come at it from two perspectives. There's, I think most importantly, I'll sort of start with the sporting side. We have resourced our sporting department in a different way for 2025, where we actually have dedicated resources who are helping to support our clubs in terms of hiring, in terms of identifying gaps, in terms of strategy. We also have, on the compliance side, a legal department that sort of ensures that where there are gaps, that we're elevating that and addressing it quickly. And those two teams really work in tandem at the league office and then with the clubs directly. It's a massive lift, as you might imagine, between September and I guess it's February / January for our clubs to be in a position to be able to fill those gaps, particularly as you look at the broader ecosystem of how much growth has happened in the women's soccer space and just needing to solve for a more robust pipeline of coaches, of trainers, of technical directors, of GMs, and really part of our job now is to develop the programs that help everyone to be able to meet the opportunity that we have right now, which is to be ready for those jobs. And so, there's a sort of 360 approach at the league level where we're working in partnership with our teams.
Is that in kind of learnings from the past, or is that more just trying to focus on being able to maybe put fires out before they start in the future?
Yeah, I mean, candidly, this is not unique to women's soccer. That's the playbook, even from the NHL or other leagues. You know, when new standards come in, you need people at the centralized office to be able to educate, inform, and help everybody to be able to source the people with the backgrounds who are needed to fill those roles. And then you also need a compliance support that holds people accountable, and that's generally how most sports leagues operate, particularly where there's new standards being implemented.
With all the new ownership groups coming in, we've seen expansion fees and team valuations rise pretty rapidly, but at the same time, I think the multiples behind those valuations are lagging behind some more established leagues, which I think is maybe a little surprising. So just curious your thoughts on the valuations, where they're at now and where they're headed. Are you satisfied with how the teams are being valued these days?
You know, it's not different than what I said earlier about, you know, predictions on valuations. You can look at a report that's like more hypothetical or academic to project or weigh in on what you think a valuation is. The best marker of a team's valuation is literally what someone will pay for it. So I don't, yes, I pay attention to it, but I don't necessarily put all that much stock in the prognostications of like this team is worth X or that team is worth Y. The thing that matters most from our perspective is when a team is for sale, actually that the process is being run correctly and what someone is willing to pay, and making sure that the right person or the right group is coming in to make sure that team is successful. So, you know, again, I don't know of a league, literally, certainly in my lifetime, that has experienced the growth that this league has in this period of time. And so those benchmarks that have occurred over the last few years are the most important indicators from our perspective, and we think where those numbers landed are healthy and reason for people to know that this is a place that is a good investment for any potential owner.
About 5 more minutes, y'all.
Okay, just to follow up on two quick follow-ups on the expansion. So obviously, expansion is ideal. Is there ever a circumstance where relocation still be considered at this point in the league's history? And then 2, speaking of expansion, has there been conversation about expanding the roster size?
Yeah. So I guess on the first point, you know, I come from the traditional professional sports league background, and this is one of the things that I think is an important learning from men's sports leagues, which is that relocation should be definitely the exception, not the rule, and should be very carefully analyzed whenever it's presented as a question. I can say that there is no market right now that is under consideration for relocation. We have successfully, again, I think in 2.5 years, sold, I don't know, a lot of teams, and avoided that even in circumstances where people worried about that as a question. So again, on the investor relations side, I personally, we at the league office spend a lot of time making sure that we are engaged and intentional about supporting a sale process to keep a team in the market where we feel like it can be successful. And so that's generally our position on relocation. As it relates to roster size, I think I'm always interested in this question, and it always causes me to go back to our sporting team to pressure test it, because in our view of looking at roster sizes as they currently exist, I mentioned this earlier, there's already too many examples where, because of how competitive our league is, we're watching to ensure that players are getting the appropriate amount of playing time. So expanding the roster is only going to exacerbate that. It won't force what people might want to solve for, which is like spreading the number of minutes across a roster. We already have rosters that would and could support that. It's our superpower that we are the most competitive league, which means that every game matters, which means that our coaches want to win every game, which means that our games are watchable on TV, which means that people want to buy tickets. So we don't want to lose that. But we are also paying attention at the same time to this question of like, how do we make sure that the minutes spread? A lot of other leagues don't have to worry about this because they have a large percentage of games that are blowouts, and so they can rotate their rosters with a little more ease and less concern for how it might affect their standings. And our league is structured differently, and we think that adds a lot of value to our league. So we have to be creative about how we think about that.
Is there any interest in any possible sort of collaboration going forward with the Northern Super League in Canada?
Yeah, there is. Well, Diana Matheson, I'll just start by saying she's a former NWSL player. So through the lens of living our values, we want nothing more than our current and former players to live their dreams and be successful. We invited Diana to the Women's League Forum, even though they haven't officially launched yet. So she and some of her staff came to Spain, and we thought that was really important to share best practices. We've also offered and have shared a lot of information that can help save them some time in what we can imagine is going to be a heavy lift to launch a league. So yeah, we are doing everything we can to support her and the league's success in Canada, and we think a successful league in Canada is good for the region, and think it's a great story to have a former NWSL player doing that, and we'll continue to lean in to do everything we can to ensure that they have our support to the extent that's helpful.
Is that what your relationship with the USL Super League is like, or would you say that is different?
No, I mean, similarly, Amanda, we're actually on the U.S. Soccer Board together. I mentioned earlier about some of the challenges with free agency and making sure that players find homes. We've seen some NWSL players, former NWSL players who didn't find a place on our rosters get signed in the USL. That's great. The more opportunities there are for the game to grow in our country and globally, the better it is for the sport. And so, yeah, we have a great working relationship, and collaborate where we can to make sure that the game is healthy in the U.S.
That's it, folks. Appreciate it.